The first reviews for A Complete Unknown are in, and critics are mostly raving about the Bob Dylan biopic. When a new film like A Complete Unknown comes out, I always like to pay close attention to it because it's going to be very artsy and it's going to be more analog filmmaking in some capacity. Not necessarily that they shot it on film, probably digital, but really the style of it allows you to be able to replicate it very easily. It inspires you to see what's actually capable, even with minimal lighting or small production value. So meaning there's not like tons of huge sets or there's not a ton of CGI. It really comes down to acting, cinematography style, as well as pretty minimal but dynamic timepiece lighting. As of right now, the film has a 47% on Rotten Tomatoes with only 66 reviews from the critics. Playing Dylan is Timothée Chalamet, who gives one of the best performances of his career. The star of the show is Timothée Chalamet. His onstage performance as Dylan is electric, and he imbues classic 1960s folk songs with a freshness and urgency that makes them feel as though they were written yesterday. Timothée Chalamet deserves applause, and Monica Barbaro nearly upstages him. The rest of A Complete Unknown is a rolling stone, all right. Rolling downhill and dragging underwritten characters with it. A Complete Unknown doesn't break open the biopic mold, but it's about as good an example of what to be expected can be. Chalamet, who used pandemic years to prepare for this performance, achieves something close to magic with the sound. This is a movie desperate not to alienate anyone. In the process, it wastes the precious time of deeply committed actors and craftspeople, not to mention paying moviegoers. The times may be changing, but A Complete Unknown follows the familiar beats of a biopic that doesn't shake the establishment in the way its subject is so famous for doing. One of the best movies of 2024, a riveting, modest, and not afraid to showcase the mundane with its journey through acoustic to electric. Timothée Chalamet gives his best performance of his career so far. And I always take these reviews with a grain of salt because honestly, when it comes down to it, these are critics that are trying to get people to probably read their article review, you know? And so I am a little hesitant. I usually wait for the more popular opinion, the public's opinion. My idea would be that people that aren't really into this genre, more slow-paced biopic musician kind of story, wouldn't necessarily go and watch it, but the fact that it's Timothée Chalamet might bring in a lot more viewers, and they might actually end up thinking it's a bit of a slugfest. When watching the trailers, there was moments that really stood out to me, with the actors really embodying the time that the film is in.
I want to tell you a little story. A few months back, my friend Woody Guthrie and I, we met a young man. He dropped in on us out of nowhere, and he played us a song.
Let's say no one wants to hear what a kid wrote last month.
Well, I like your songs.
How about that Joan Baez, folks? Well, she's pretty. Sings pretty. Maybe a little too pretty.
Your songs are like an oil painting at the dentist's office.
You're kind of an asshole, Bob.
Honestly, I think it might be difficult to upstage Edward Norton with his ability to embody a specific kind of character. He has such range, but we'll see. I mean, everyone is saying Timothée Chalamet did a great job in the reviews, so we'll just have to wait and see if that actually holds up to the public's opinion. It definitely seems like he put a ton of effort into crafting his performance for this Bob Dylan character.
Sort of blasphemous on its nose. That's why Joel Cohen, before we had Mangold involved, who directed Inside Llewyn Davis, I said, hey, why don't you direct the Bob Dylan movie? And he said, it's impossible. And I said, why is it impossible? He goes, because it's not about a singular moment. How do you, in a 2-hour movie, encompass the miracle that is the breadth of what he wrote and how much he got out, and the fact that it's like watching paint dry? Because how do you make lyric writing interesting, basically?
So tell me, what is the movie about?
1961 and 1965, a young Bob Dylan arriving in New York and how his career took off. And you had people like Pete Seeger, Dave Van Ronk, or Paul Clayton that were like folk stars, but through McCarthyism, folk music got blacklisted in the late 50s. So nobody had cracked through, and rock and roll was seen as this kind of thin music that was...
You're not on the picket line with us.
Right, yeah, exactly. It was like aimed at teenagers. So the Newport Folk Festival was sort of the Coachella, let's say, for lack of a better metaphor, of the picket line, of pure music, of folk music. And so there was sort of an opening for someone sort of take over the folk community. The structure of the movie is that Woody Guthrie was dying and that Pete Seeger was sort of the lieutenant, and he was slated to take over the folk community. And out of nowhere, a prophet shows up, that is Bob Dylan, who inexplicably takes over everything at once, and who in Bob's words, the songs are coming from God. And the Ed Bradley interview says, I can't do it anymore. And then at the moment of deification, at the moment where he was on top, decided to turn his back on the folk community in one interpretive way. In another way, he just wanted to make the music he wanted to make and became a rock and roll star. Let's say the first rock and roll star at the Newport Folk Festival, got booed off stage, or like a mixed reaction, what was considered pop music or whatever, rock and roll, and he played it at what was supposed to be a space of purity.
At a time when he was considered to be the one person through all of this blacklisting, this fear-mongering, this McCarthyism, there's no place for politics and music. If you step on that stage and you speak about government and we speak about our actions, we will make it very tough for you to reach your audience. That was legitimately happening. He was bigger than that. So they saw him as someone who was going to be able to destroy that methodology. Cut through and reach people. And then he went over here.
And played rock and roll. Yeah. And sort of, got rid of his savior label. The irony is now, like a Rolling Stone or Subterranean Homesick Blues, they're kind of considered some of his best music.
This is fascinating because personally, I haven't seen Timothée Chalamet show this much enthusiasm, be this articulate, have so many thoughts about a role he's playing in an interview. And I looked around for different interviews where he's talking about his character. This is actually a really good one. You should definitely check it out, the one he did with Apple Music. So it seems to me like he is very engaged with this film. He's very invested, and it's been years of his life. I think they started casting him in like 2019. I couldn't really find the budget for this particular film, but I did find a Reddit thread that I guess it did some math, and based on tax credits in the state of New Jersey, the film was somewhere in between 60 and 70 million. So that seems kind of high, but if you take into account there has to be a lot of extras paid, it took a lot of time, it's a long movie, and there's a lot of different sets to construct, it makes sense that you would have that kind of range. Plus, Timothée Chalamet is kind of a huge actor at the moment. So I like to take a look at, even before we see the movie, when it comes out in just a couple weeks, what can we learn from this? Like, how do aspiring independent filmmakers can achieve something that is similar to the magic that a movie like this kind of captures cinematically or with character development? Because like at the heart of these type of films, even if they do have a very large budget and maybe it comes from a studio and so it really isn't considered a indie film at that point, it really has the spirit of indie. It's telling a story with not a lot of red tape involved. So there's not like a lot of video effects. It really comes down to engaging settings, engaging lighting, and engaging actors. Taking a look at some of these lighting setups and cinematography choices, it is very simple. Like a lot of these is kind of like maybe one or two light sources, and they're using a lot of harsh shadows to create a mood. And I think especially for a timepiece film, that is very effective, and it comes across as extremely beautiful. Even a shot like this, it appears as though the only light source is the lamp with a little bit of backlight coming off of the wall behind him. So these aren't like extremely high production value scene setups. They're very minimal, but they get the job done and they look great. Even a shot like this, they probably had like a really big ARRI light shooting through the window, and then they created a little bit of haze in the room so you get those light streaks that he could like pass through, and it just looks creatively interesting. But for an indie film, if you want a shot or a scene that looks like this with the light source being the window and light beams, you know, filling the space to help compositionally create something interesting, and you don't have access to a really large light where you can set up outside and create the exact environment you want, you could literally make this B-roll shots and insert into your film and shoot it in a room where light has coming through the window during golden hour, put a little bit of haze, like they're not that expensive. You could throw some haze in a room and then get some really incredible shots that look very similar to this. All of this to say is that when you want to make a film, if you want to create something that looks visually engaging and you're really excited about the story and about the cinematography and about the vibe of the film you want to create, it doesn't take a whole lot. Like if you had a pack of 4 or 5 lights that you could have plenty of gels to throw on, and you could pretty much take those lights and put them in any environment, and you can craft some really amazing cinematography that's on par with a movie like this one that's starring like the biggest actor in the world at the moment. I think what it really comes down to is knowing exactly visually what you're going for. So storyboarding helps with that, especially if you are not naturally practiced in capturing specific shots on the day. I think the more you get experience, the more you're comfortable with trying different shots out without having to storyboard. But really, like if you're new, you should storyboard exactly the shots you want and kind of like how they're going to lay out next to each other, so that you don't miss it. When you're on production, you tend to just forget about all the little details and just try to get like necessary shots that you're looking for. And then you end up getting to editing and you might have a little bit of a continuity issue. It may not string together very well, or the shots may just not be very dynamic. I recently did a podcast with a couple young filmmakers in the UK who talked about how they casted for their film. They actually did a Facebook casting call and watched self-tapes of the actors that they were looking for, so that they made sure they had at least what was available to them, the best options when it comes to acting. And I would encourage you, if a movie like this, like it's really going to be sold on how engaging is the story and how engaging are the characters. And a lot of times, doesn't matter how strong a character is, if the actor's not delivering well, then it could completely fall apart. So I would encourage indie filmmakers, if you've got a story you believe in, if you believe the characters are fleshed out, make sure you do your casting call, make sure that you get yourself a good lighting setup, and make sure that you test ideas and create a storyboard for exactly what you want it to look like. Because even a movie like this with a potential $60 to $80 million budget, how it looks, how it feels is very achievable for even an indie filmmaker with a $1,500 budget. Let me know in the comments what you're excited about most for A Complete Unknown. Let me know if you're actually going to go see this movie in the theaters, and thank you for subscribing to this channel and liking the video.